great thing about, addiction, one of the, terrible things and great things, is that it numbs you. That's why you keep doing it again and again, is it numbs your emotions. So you have to be willing to remove that, Novocaine, so to speak, and actually feel what's happening.
Patience is a bitch. But without it, we'd only get caught up in either instant gratification or numbing. That was my guest this week, Dina Barnes, and you're listening to the Recover Yourself podcast, where we address the topics you'll be facing while on a journey beyond simply recovering from whatever you're leaving behind. My mission with this podcast is to expand the definition and scope of recovery and addiction so everyone has an opportunity to recover themselves. So no matter where you are on the journey, there is a place for you here. Today, we're talking about patience and how just being open to dropping old false beliefs we picked up while growing up can carry us into long-term sobriety. We are addressing a bit of the recovering from stage and what can be done to start opening up and welcoming the next recover to stage. When it comes to recovering from, the list of things we could need to recover from is endless. So just because you may not have had a drink in almost 20 years like myself, that doesn't have anything to do with me being done recovering from. You see, while I'm on a journey to recovering to, I continue to uncover places where I pacify myself. I use the word pacify to denote a small habit that removes a bit of awareness from my day. Anything that causes us to check out or that gets in the way of our clarity reduces our actions to only contributing to that moment and is not part of leading us to the future. Now, Dina lays out a process of being patient with ourselves through the recovering from stages. These processes are ones that we might have to engage in repeatedly at different stages of our lives, even well after having a life that looks nothing like it did in active addiction. Because better than a life in active addiction is no longer the goal. That was the easy target. Now we have some real work to do to recovering ourselves. Dina, thank you so much for being with me. I am so excited to talk with you. And you're in Chicago, so there is a special place. I was born and raised in Chicago. I started to not like the person that was so staunch Chicago. And then it took a while, but like I had to shed all of that image that I believed I was that revolved around being in Chicago.
Yeah, and it's funny how much of that image revolves around drinking, right?
So you see where I'm going.
When the time comes and, it's time to hit up the bars, and that's just the Chicago life. We have a lot of great bars, a lot of good scene on that level. So
yeah. Having been born and bred in Chicago, I didn't know until I met people from outside of Chicago that we are so it's so centered on this idea of restaurants and bars here. I mean, I've always been proud of the food here, but really, I didn't know that we were different.
Yeah, I mean, and when you think about our weather and things like that, it kind of makes sense. Whereas other places, even though we have a beautiful lakefront, it's kind of only accessible during like the spring and summer, right? Where you can actually go there and enjoy it, as far as running or cycling and things like that. Whereas other places may have those outdoor spaces and things like that a little bit longer around the year. And then we also have Chicagoland, the suburbs, where there's even less activity, even less things to do. Right. So leaves more time and idle mind, and gets into trouble.
That's right. So can you kind of start with the analogy that you see as being the healing of the psyche beyond the healing of recovering from an addiction?
Absolutely. Yeah. When it comes to addiction, it's really a mind state, right? It's really a mental pattern that we've built up over time. And everyone has been through something. We all have, these things that we carry in our life that have created how we handle life on a daily basis. And because of that, when we try to make a shift into something new, it's kind of like our mind picks it up as we're almost killing ourselves. It's like, wait, the life that I've been doing so far has been just fine. What are you doing? So you have to tell yourself, like, no, It's going to be okay. This new thing that I'm seeing is going to be fine for all of me. And we're not, yes, we're dying to those actions, but we're coming alive to this new state and this new way of being. So it's kind of like you have to coach your way through your journey and through your changes. I always talk about, really connecting into that internal dialogue, because there are patterns of thought that are happening throughout your day that at sometimes they can be shouting at you, but most of the times it's just tiny whispers. And we often don't hear those whispers. We just kind of follow their command. So what I recommend is to kind of on a daily basis take a moment to quiet your mind and actually start to talk to that internal voice and see what needs to be healed. And a lot of times it's going to be painful, but just like, when you get a cut and you have to put a band-aid and ointment and let it scab up before it heals, it's the same thing with when you're going through the healing process. You have to look at that pain, look at that sore site, and begin to mend it through healthier actions, through healthier ways of thinking. And it's not going to be easy the first, few steps of the journey, but as you get along, that pain is going to heal more and more. And eventually that scab of, pain will fall away and you'll have a nice, fresh, renewed being. So it's quite lovely how it works out.
So I do want to talk about this pain. Where is it? How is it related to? I mean, this is a Recover Yourself podcast, so we're going to be talking a little bit about recovery, right? I mean, I normally talk about like long-term recovery, and I know that this is a long-term recovery conversation.
Definitely, definitely. And the body carries many different energetic systems and things like that. So within traditional Chinese medicine, there are like the 12 meridians. Within yoga, there are the chakras. Within Ayurveda, there are the marmas. So there's many different systems have figured out that there are energetic places in the body that store our memory, store our pain, store our overall energy of our body, and fuel how we go throughout our day to day. So within things of recovery, things of addiction, a lot of times those things happen within the more, we'll say, kind of base level of our being. So our formative years is where a lot of the pain that happens in the psyche that translates as we get older takes place. So it's usually those years before 7, I would say between the age of 1, birth and 7 years old. We go through a lot within those first 7 years, and we're getting fed so much by the adults around us as far as how we perceive our world, how we perceive our place in the world. So if during those times things have been quite stressful, your body system has learned to react to stress in a certain way. It's learned to defend itself in a certain way. And that pattern is going to continue as you get older, and different experiences are going to continue to confirm those initial experiences until you get to a point where you realize, wait, I'm caught up in a pattern. I don't quite know how I got here. It's kind of this waking up that happens for some people where they realize I'm moving, but I don't feel like I'm directing my movements. And when you start to have that thought, that's when you are ready to start kind of backtracking through and figuring out where everything is coming from.
When we have early experiences that in which we begin to define the world with, right? Because all of these experiences, I like to talk about this thing in terms of like, these are things that we learned, not things we were taught, right? Like the things that we were taught were things that, people didn't know what we were learning, right? So, like the word that is so popular these days, and I like to use as well, is trauma, right? Like, and I like to say, like, trauma's trauma. Like, some of us have really big T trauma, and some of us have little t trauma. But those traumas or those experiences were how we defined the world. Now, those traumas, and there's a meme going around that says, like, trauma is the gateway drug, right? And that brings us to our drinking and whatnot. And now, when we want to access that, how do we start questioning, and how do we know? I mean, you went into it a little bit, but I want to talk a little bit about, like, one, we're never not ready to, like, face our trauma, but two, how do we know when we're ready? Like, if that makes sense to you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, honestly, when you start to think, am I ready to address this? You're ready. That's how I see it. Because, I think of, as a teenager, a lot of actions that I was doing, I was just doing them. I never thought, why am I doing this action? How will this action affect my future? Things like that. But when I did start having those thoughts, that's when I began my healing process. So I definitely think that once you become conscious of your actions, once it's brought to your attention, that is the world around you, the universe around you, letting you know that you're ready.
Yeah. And like you said, like, we always have to look back to ourselves, and we have to, like, heal. And I'm very much in the category of, like, be patient, like, but also be vigilant.
Yeah.
So how do we direct people, like, that are kind of getting into early recovery? Because, I mean, we have all sorts of people listening to this podcast. Again, I talk about long-term recovery, but I want to be able to be a resource for those who are in early recovery. And how many years do you have in recovery?
So almost 6 years.
Okay,
Yeah.
wonderful. So that is some time, and that's some time that, really kind of allows us to step away from the fear of going back tomorrow, because we have so much to lose. But we also have started doing this extra work. What is this extra work to you, and how did you experience this over your first 5 years, and how do you think it's gonna, like, and how would you help somebody get here?
Yeah, I think it's coming to an understanding of the need to have compassion for yourself and to understand that it is a journey. It isn't something that's going to happen overnight. And the first thing that you can do is to begin that internal conversation. The first thing that you can do is to stop the action that is causing you the trauma, right? That's causing you to repeatedly open up that wound. So you have to press pause. You have to
Now,
press
are you referencing, like, just like our DOC, or are you referencing other things as well here?
Yeah, so it depends on the level of toxicity you have in your life. So if you for the most part, have healthy relationships and all of that, but you just realizing that you do overconsume alcohol or anything else really, and you want to start to step away from that, then it may be a fairly simpler journey for you, because it really is just stopping that, getting to kind of where it started. Maybe, you were trying to fit in or whatever it was, and just working through that kind of small step there. For other people, kind of going into that big T, right? It's a little bit deeper. So they also have to deal not only with their addiction, but also with their anger, also with their complacency, their inability to act on thoughts, that they may have about making a better life for themselves. So it goes a little bit deeper for some people. And since that can be so broad a spectrum, the first thing that you can do is kind of find out where you are on that spectrum. And that's only going to start when you actually can take a look at yourself. And the way that you begin to take a look at yourself is by getting in tune with your breath, starting some form of minimal meditation. And meditation, honestly, is such a broad term because there's so many different ways you can get into that state, but it's literally just getting quiet and listening and feeling yourself, allowing yourself to feel. A great thing about, addiction, one of the, terrible things and great things is that it numbs you. That's why you keep doing it again and again, is it numbs your emotions. So you have to be willing to remove that, Novocaine, so to speak, and actually feel what's happening. And at first, it's going to feel just like shots of electricity. Everything is everywhere because you're completely scattered. But getting in tune with your breath will let you kind of start to calm down that nervous system and just find out what the prominent thing is in that moment, and to work forward from there. So you'll find out, what is the prominent thing that's sitting on top of it all, right? So it may be, your anger that you want to address at first. It may be a system of depression that you want to address at first. It may be the addiction itself that you want to address it at first. But whatever it is going to sit on top of the surface when you're going into that quiet state, and you'll be able to move forward from there.
That's beautiful. So I always look at this wound, this psychic wound, right, as something that we are trying to cover up with our addiction,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that our addiction is what is infecting that wound and making it even worse than it was. But when it was what it was, we couldn't deal with it. And so we hid it. In terms of this, how do we deal with both our addiction or like, and I talk about it in terms of like, deal with your addiction. I don't give a fuck how you do that shit. Like, you just deal with your addiction and then start looking at yourself. But there are ways to lay some groundwork within early recovery so that you can, this is part of the process.
Mm-hmm.
How would you help someone in early recovery start?
Absolutely. I mean, I definitely think that there is a way to kind of take care of both things together. The main thing, once you become aware of your addiction, to start the process of letting it go, right? So to give, say, this week or the next 3 days or today, I'm going to not drink, and during that day, I'm going to maybe write a journal entry about how I'm feeling. I'm going to, sit by the lake, go for a walk, and just listen to my thoughts for this day. Just start with one day, honestly. One day.
And that's going to be painful now. That is not, like, we're putting this out there like,
till 4 a.m. drinking, okay, and you started your day off with a hangover, okay, it's not going to be easy, but still start there. Don't think that you have to, just because I drank last night, I guess I can't start tomorrow. No, whenever you're ready, just start, and then forward from there. But definitely use tools such as journaling, use tools such as just walking meditation to start that process of movement in the right direction.
Yeah, and when you say meditation, like you have the same idea as I do, I think, which is like meditation might be a big word for some folks. Like this might be like, whoop, whoop, whoop. So I just call it sitting quietly.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm working to kind of get to that same place of understanding, helping people to understand, like, I just literally mean for you to sit and breathe.
That's right. Yeah.
You don't need a pillow or candles or mantra. Just sit and listen really to what's happening inside your head,
Yeah. So in terms of healing this wound now we're getting to a place where, okay, we understand, like, we got to put down the thing that is keeping me hiding from the thing that I'm hiding from, right? Like, so we have our DOC and we got this under control. Now, how do we find the trauma? Like, what is it? Like, how do we find our trauma? Because every individual it's going to be a different answer. But how is it possible to locate it? Like, what am I looking for?
Absolutely. So I have written a workbook that kind of takes you through those levels, I call them. So it's about 5 different levels that I point out in my book. And within it, each level has kind of its own internal journey. So the first level is really that recognition stage, and then that beginning of releasing that internal pain, so to speak. And I'd recommend, taking that look within, beginning to connect actually to what I would call your internal child. That's really the first place that I have found to be worthy of starting. So that begins with that sitting quietly and actually creating if you're not good at visualizing, it's okay. You can get a picture of yourself as a child and put it in front of you. But basically visualizing that child self sitting in a blank room. Set up a chair for yourself and a chair for the child, and begin to communicate with that child. So, you can just simply ask, how are you feeling? That child may burst out crying or it may burst out laughing, so you begin this conversation there and then grow through each level from there.
Because I know all of the trauma that I have, that my life is dictated around, is coming from when I was a child.
Yeah. And that's typically because that's the time where and I'm kind of I feel like this term is overused now, but the subconscious mind, right, gets programmed really during those stages. So
Mm-hmm.
that's that internal self that, guides without leading, so to speak, that leads without yelling, that just helps, that you move through without even knowing that you're moving according to that. So when you're dealing with that internal child, that's kind of who you're talking to, or what you're talking to is that subconscious mind energy.
Yeah. And yeah, like when we were nonverbal, we just learned a whole bunch of stuff and we can't always reflect on it because it was so nonverbal.
Exactly, but it's absorbed in our body. It's held within our muscle system, it's held within our nervous system by how we react to the world, So yeah, it's definitely still there.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and I did an interview with Nikki Myers, who did yoga 12-step recovery, and she says the issues are in the tissues and you got to move that shit around. So I want to be able to chat a little bit more about what you've seen in terms of the healing and the scabbing, and is it ever over? Or is it something that you just are maintaining constantly, like a constant state of healing?
Yeah, I can definitely tell you, for me, going into, completing 6 years on this journey, it is not something that has stopped. It's definitely something that I have grown through and, grown because of. So the way that, I respond to the world now is definitely different than it was 6 years ago. I have a lot more patience and things like that. And I feel like a lot more kind of grounding to bounce off of, so to speak, as far as, how I react to the world around me. And I think that that's going to always be there. You're going to always have to carry that memory of your journey, right? It's like we tell each other all the time, never forget where you come from, right? That renewing of energy that you're going through with your sober journey is where you're going to come from when you look at things 10 years from now. So you don't want to forget the journey. You don't want to ever step off of the path, but you always want to use it kind of as your anchor so that you can find your way through the rest of the ocean of life.
Yeah. A big part of moving forward is your life, right? So healing isn't about sobriety. Sobriety is about getting to healing, which is about getting to living your life.
Exactly. It's amazing how much more fulfilling life is without being held back really by a numbing substance. Being able to feel the world around you means that you're now able to create space for the people around you, for the experiences that you want to have, and you're able to allow others to have space, that you don't always have to make it about you. You don't always have to be, the center of the universe. You can allow others to exist as well, and then realizing that they're a reflection of you and you're a reflection of them. And it's this communication that starts to happen energetically with the people in your life, with the actual world and kind of trees and everything around you that you begin to resonate with is quite amazing.
Yeah. Now, I want to talk a little bit about reinfecting our wounds and re-engaging in our wounds. Of course, these are possibilities, right? Like we as people tend to practice a lot of what I like to call awareness avoidance,
Yeah.
right? We like to avoid being aware. So how does we're getting through the basics of recovery, and let's say, it wasn't even hard recovery for someone. Let's say it was, small t trauma, and they just, got angry all the time, and so they were addicted to their anger. Now they're getting their anger under control. All of a sudden they start engaging in other activities that help them numb.
Yeah.
What are some of those? Is that something that we could look to and say, like, are we looking to just be like totally sober, of just like, like, we don't use food, we don't use coffee, we don't use like all these things to escape, because we use all sorts of things to escape. Now, how do we kind of manage living in the world we do on this path that we want it to be clear, but how can we engage in, awareness avoidance at times, and then just be okay with that? Or how does that kind of read to you, or whatnot?
Yeah, I definitely think that the main thing to remember is that the what you were doing before and thinking you were escaping was really your body and your mind looking for a reset. And I think that a reset is natural. That's what you should want to experience as human beings, because think of, anyone that's growing, right? You're going to get to a point where you expand, and now you have to reset so that you can grow bigger. You reset so that you can expand more. So that reset is totally fine. It's finding out a healthy way to do that reset. So you may do it through detoxing for 3 days, or, taking, 7 days and doing a green juice cleanse, or whatever it is. You just do something that kind of shakes things up. Find something that actually inspires you, that's healthy, that you can use as your reset. So it's taking the control back, so to speak. So instead of letting your addiction say, well, I'm the only reset you need, you say, no, there's like 100 things I could be doing right now to reset my energy. It's also very natural for you to experience stress on a daily basis and feel like you need a relief from that stress. There are many natural things that you can do to get that. So if you find that it's hard for you to sleep at night, get some melatonin, find, a sleep vitamin, something like that can help you. Take a long bath, take use of magnesium, so there's lots of things, lots of ways that you can biohack yourself without needing to go into something like alcohol or drugs or any other thing of your choice.
Yeah, and I want to add that all of those things can be addictive, right? Like running, like I know a lot of people who've turned running into their like personal addiction, and still are hiding by running.
And that's the thing. You want to think, when you're doing anything, if you find yourself revving up to a point where, you're like, I got to do this. And if you don't do this like me, then you're not, you find yourself placing borders around yourself, then you're not in a healthy place with that particular thing. So you want to find a healthy place with it. So typically, if it is something like running, or, participating in some kind of activity, the sports or something like that, if you find that, it's getting to be that revved up state and you're feeling like you're closing yourself off, then reset from that. Take a break from that particular thing. Go get a massage, go on a vacation, take a week off, whatever it is that you need to do to reset from that particular thing, so yeah, that's what I would recommend.
And I believe that, we started this conversation talking about Chicago, and I think that, like that, when I was getting sober, and even when I was using and drinking, it was really an identity label. And like you said, that box, and I look at that box as being, you're putting yourself, you're attaching this label to yourself, and that becomes dangerous for so many reasons. And how could that label, can you express how that label turns into an infection of a trauma wound?
Yeah. So, I mean, anytime, again, that you're finding that you're placing yourself in a box, that you're finding that, you're not able to have a conversation with someone that's not into the same things that you're into, if you find that you're just stuck, then at that point you're causing another wound, or you're keeping a wound open. And you'll notice, when things are triggering you. You'll notice when, you're in a space like it, you'll feel like a twinge, inside, like, oh, this feels uncomfortable. And that is something that can allow for you to kind of guide your way, like, away from that situation.
That's beautiful. Is there anything that, like, you're feeling like we missed, any gaps?
I know one thing that you asked me about, was just kind of how we behave when we're ready, like, to kind of re-enter the world again, right? What to do in those moments. And really, I feel like what keeps you away is fear, right? You're afraid that, if I go back around my friends, then I'm going to get back into this, So you do have to give yourself enough time to build up that willpower, and then give yourself, your own tools in those environments. So for example, if you're going to a restaurant and enjoying a meal with friends, things like that, you may want to bring along your own drink, your own non-alcoholic wine or non-alcoholic beer, or whatever, adaptogenic tea, or whatever it is that you like. Bring it along with you, so that way you don't have to worry about whether they have a good non-alcoholic drink at this place. Also understand that who you are sober is really even more fun. And, sober doesn't have to be boring, so you're still just as fun, you're still just as vibrant, and let that energy come out. Anytime that you're in those situations and you're feeling yourself be fearful, lean into the conversation more, lean into, the activity around you more, without participating in drinking or drugging or whatever it is. So, that's one thing I would just recommend, is just to give yourself some form of tools around you, but don't be afraid to step back into those situations. Another thing that I noticed with myself personally is, there are just things, entertainment can be triggering, right? So recently I was watching a show on HBO called I May Destroy You, and it's very fast paced. It's dealing with a lot of trauma issues. Like, the young lady is basically, drugged up the whole time. And, the first episode, she goes through some really dramatic things from it. But watching it, I could feel, myself being triggered internally. I could feel memories of, what it felt like to be in that state and things like that. When you, again, start to feel that way, push through it. Understand that you're not currently in that action, and you don't have to go back to that action. You can still enjoy the entertainment without the participation.
Yeah. And enjoying life without the participation of things that take you away from life. I think that's a big, that's a big deal.
Yeah, definitely.
Dina, thank you so much for joining me and talking with me about healing through trauma. Really, I really appreciate everything that you've shared.
Absolutely. I appreciate you having me on and giving me an opportunity to share. It's really great.
Well, thank you. One of the big takeaways of this episode is that those things we use to check out with, all of those things, are hiding our wounds from ourselves. By hiding them, you don't get a chance to heal them. So no matter how many years you have or where you are on the recovery journey, you are going to have to continue to revisit the recover from aspects of recovery. I mean, I know I talk all about recovering too, and I am a firm believer it is the way to true recovery. But without continually leaving who we were behind, we will not step into our total authentic selves. In last week's episode with Alan Baker, he mentioned not getting addicted to the identity of who and where we are. That is very poignant here. If you didn't get a chance to see last week's episode, I encourage you to check it out. We all have to learn to stop hiding from our wounds and address them head on. Doing that creates a loop of healing that feeds itself and allows us to grow more and more every day. Please rate and review this podcast and or leave comments for this episode to help me better create helpful content Support this show at anchor.fm or support me and my work at Patreon, where you will get access to unedited content as well as writings and one-on-one access to supporter group portrait sessions with me. Those links, along with links to everything Dina is doing, can be found in the description of this episode. I want to thank you for listening to the Recover Yourself podcast, and until next time, keep recovering yourself.